Thomas Paine, born in England, January 29, 1737 AD, was an Anglo-Saxon revolutionary writer, which supposedly brought liberty and freedom to America. He was a commoner of England and one of the true founding fathers of the United States of America. In fact, Paine named it, the United States. Thomas Paine was for liberty and freedom, not just against taxation and the British Parliament. When he came to America in 1774 AD, America was already in a state of rebellion. He saw this as an opportunity to do away with the monarchy of England. This prompted his writing of Common Sense, which was a 50-page book. This book paved way for the Declaration of Independence with statements such as superiority of republican government over a monarchical system, equality of rights among all citizens, and the world significance of the American Revolution. Common Sense by Thomas Paine. His basic conclusion of Common Sense was a call for independence from Great Britain. Everything that is with or reasonable pleas for separation, the blood of the slave to weeping voice of nature cries 'tis time to part. Common Sense by Thomas Paine. His writings were greatly influenced. Everyone read this book. It is said that 150,000 copies sold on January 10, 1776 AD, which was Thomas Paine's first publication. His second was the Declaration of Independence, and was only authored by Thomas Jefferson. According to the Complete Reference Library Dictionary, a writer is one who writes, especially in occupation. And an author is one who assumes responsibility for the content of a published or an unpublished text. Thomas Jefferson was responsible for selling the Declaration of Independence. It was Thomas Jefferson who removed the anti-slavery clause that Thomas Paine originally wrote, and with this clause, there would have never been slavery in the United States of America after the Declaration of Independence was signed. The first part of the Declaration is a scientific statement, and the rest of it was against the king or monarchy. So you can clearly see that this was the work of Thomas Paine. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were not against the king or English monarchy. They were trying to appeal to the aristocrats, which they were a part of themselves. Their only real complaint were the taxes being imposed on them by Parliament of Britain. After all of the things Thomas Paine did as the true father of this country, he was denied the right to vote because he was not a citizen of the United States. He retired to New Rochelle, New York, on a farm, fearing his enemies would not let him rest. He died on June 8, 1809 AD, and later his bones were exhumed and shipped to his native land in England, where they were lost and have never been found to this day. The first Constitution of the United States was the Articles of Confederation. It was drafted by the Continental Congress in 1777 AD, which governed only the original 13 states. Before the American Revolution, it was ratified or signed by these 13 states/colonies in 1781 AD. The Articles only provided for a firm league of friendship in which each of the 13 states willfully retained its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. Congress functioned under these Articles until 1788 AD, when a revived edition was signed by all the states and adopted as the Constitution of the United 13 States of America in 1789 AD, which is when George Washington became president. However, there were 9 previous presidents of the Union, of which John Hanson was the first, under the Articles of Confederation. John Hanson, born April 3, 1721, November 15, 1783 AD, was a black Maryland patriot during the American Revolution, and first president of the new nation under the Articles of Confederation. A member of the Maryland Assembly from 1757 AD, he became active in the resistance to British tax measures in the 1760s AD, and was an early supporter of independence. As a delegate to the Continental Congress, 1780-82 AD, Hanson signed the Articles of Confederation and played an important part in persuading New York and Virginia to give up their claims to Western territory, because he was elected by Congress as President of the United States and Congress assembled in 1781 AD. It was called Congress Assembled, because there was 2 sets of Congress. The first Congress had met a year earlier on October 26, 1774 AD. The second Congress met May 10, 1775 AD. It was under this Congress that the Articles of Confederation was proposed. After undergoing many revisions, it was finally ratified and signed by the 13 states of the Union. John Hanson was the first president under these Articles of Confederation and has sometimes been called the first president of the United States. Unknowingly to most, John Hanson was a Nuwapian. Contrary to what many are informed, George Washington was not the first president, for the question would be if George Washington was a general in the war against Britain, then who was the president that appointed him general? How could he be general without being appointed by a president? There were 14 other presidents before George Washington. They were the presidents of the Continental Congress. John Hanson was the first president of the Union under the Articles of Confederation, thereby making him the first president of the United States. He was the one that appointed George Washington general in the Civil War. If you look closely at the haircut of George Washington, you can see that it represents the Namuz, a Terret, Pathite, called Egyptian headdress, which represents the male lion's mane, as seen in the symbol of the Sphinx, the combination of the pharaoh and the lion. This is because George Washington was abducted into the Freemasonic order by Benjamin Banneker, also known as Big Ben Bey, a Moor, who designed the White House in replica of Casablanca, the White House in Morocco. George Washington was of the Order of the Whigs, and in order for him to be president he had to be initiated into this order. Proof that George Washington was a Freemason is the fact that he wore a Masonic apron, which he thanked Brother Elkanah Watson and M. Cassoul of Nantes, France for the Masonic apron they sent him in 1782 AD, in a letter, which has been documented. This is before he was sworn into office by Chancellor Robert R. Livingston on April 30, 1789 AD. This letter can be found in the Masonic Hall in Chancellor Robert R. Livingston's library and museum. Also, the Bible that George Washington took his first oath of office on, as administered to him by Chancellor Robert R. Livingston, who was the Grand Master of Masons in New York at the time, is also found in this Masonic Hall as an altar Bible of St. John. It became known as Washington's Bible. This historic Bible has been used at 4 other presidential inaugurations: Warren G. Harding in 1921 AD, Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953 AD, Jimmy Carter in 1977 AD, and George Bush in 1989 AD. The Grand Lodge of New York was organized under a warrant issued by the ancient Grand Lodge of London, England, dated the 5th day of September 1781 AD, in the 7th year of the Grand Mastership of the 4th Duke of Athol. George Washington wore this apron as Master of Alexandria Lodge and also at the laying of the cornerstone of the national capital. Robert R. Livingston, as previously mentioned, was the Chancellor of the Continental Congress. This title Chancellor is the same as the Chief Justice, used mainly in a British or European country. It is this office that administrates the presidential inaugurations. Benjamin Banneker, 1731 to 1806 AD, whose real name was Benjamin Banna, was a Moor who was born in Baltimore, and helped to establish the foundation of this country. Benjamin was a mathematician. While farming he taught himself astronomy. At age 22 he constructed a clock made entirely of wood, with each gear carved entirely by hand. In 1789, President George Washington appointed Banneker to the commission charged with planning the construction of Washington, with Major Andrew Ellicott, helped survey the site of the national capital between 1791 and 1793 AD. Benjamin was also a surveyor. He attended a school open to blacks and whites, showing that it was not about being a slave. Were you attending only a black school because Moors were not considered slaves? Now, Benjamin Banneker served as assistant to Major Andrew Ellicott in 1791 AD, the surveyor appointed by President George Washington to lay out the boundaries of the District of Columbia. This country was established and built by the Moors, who left it in the hands of the Caucasians, and returned to France. That is why there are 2 symbols on the dollar bill. Benjamin Banneker also became widely known as the compiler of the Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia Almanac and Ephemeris, published annually from 1792 to 1802 AD. He sent the manuscript of the first almanac to revolutionary leader and future U.S. President Thomas Jefferson, then Secretary of State. With the manuscript, Banneker included a letter in which he protested slavery and disputed Jefferson's claim that blacks were intellectually inferior to whites. Abolitionists used the almanacs as evidence of the intellectual capabilities of blacks. There were other prominent presidents that were Freemasons, including George Washington, August 4, 1753 AD, Fredericksburg Lodge No. 4, Fredericksburg v. The others being, James Monroe, 1775 AD, Williamsburg Lodge No. 6, Andrew Jackson, 1800 AD, Harmony Lodge No. 1, Nashville, James Polk, September 4, 1820 AD, Columbia Lodge No. 31, James Buchanan, January 24, 1817 AD, Lodge No. 43, Lancaster, Andrew Johnson, 1851 AD, Greenville Lodge No. 119, Greenville, James Garfield, November 22, 1864 AD, Magnolia Lodge No. 20, Columbus, Ohio, William McKinley, May 3, 1865 AD, Hiram Lodge No. 21, Winchester, Theodore Roosevelt, April 24, 1901 AD, Matinacock Lodge No. 806, Oyster Bay, NY, William Howard Taft, February 18, 1909 AD, affiliated with Kilwinning Lodge No. 356, Cincinnati, Ohio, Warren Harding, August 27, 1920 AD, Marion Lodge No. 70, Marion, Ohio, Franklin D. Roosevelt, November 28, 1911 AD, Holland Lodge No. 8, Hyde Park, NY, Harry S. Truman, March 9, 1909 AD. Belton Lodge No. 450, Gerald R. Ford, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Jimmy Carter, George Bush, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Herbert Hoover. It is a myth that all presidents were Freemasons, and that all judges are Freemasons. That is not true. All presidents were not Freemasons, and all judges are not Freemasons. There are female judges, Jewish judges, Oriental judges, etc., and all of them are not Freemasons. In fact, President John F. Kennedy was not a Freemason, he was a Knights of Columbus, of the Order of Eagles. So, don't believe the myth that all presidents and judges are Freemasons, because that is not true. However, there is a case in which a slave named Omar ibn Said being freed because of a Masonic sign. The Arab World by Ayad al-Kazzaz and Ruth Afifi and Audrey Shabazz Nahda states in the case of Omar ibn Said, a Masonic sign was his salvation. Compelling interest led scholars and men of goodwill to investigate and free some to return to their homeland. The Continental Congress was an early form of government of the United States for 15 years, 1774-89 AD. It was made up of 50 representatives from the 13 original American states, initially colonies. The Continental Congress at first came together to protest certain measures of the British Parliament. It also urged the colonists to arm themselves in defense of their rights. Before this meeting closed, the delegates agreed to meet a second time. By the time the second meeting was held, the Civil War had started, which as history tells results in America's independence. The Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation was therefore drafted. As mentioned earlier, the Articles of Confederation was proposed in 1776 AD, the same year as the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was signed and ratified on July 4, 1776 AD. However, the Articles of Confederation was signed and ratified much later in the year 1781 AD. The following is a listing of the 14 presidents of the Continental Congress. Remember, the United States did not have an official written government until the Articles of Confederation was signed in 1781 AD, which was right before it won its independence from Britain. The 14 presidents are 1. Randolph, Paine, 1721 AD to 1775 AD, pre-revolutionary American politician, was born in Williamsburg, Virginia, and educated at the College of William and Mary. He was an influential member of the Virginia House of Burgesses from 1748 AD to his death, and in 1764 AD, he rallied the opposition of the Burgesses, or legislators, against the threatened Stamp Act. In 1766 AD, he became Speaker of the House, an office he retained for the rest of his life. Randolph was appointed to the First Continental Congress at Philadelphia and served as its president in 1774 AD, and 1775 AD, he also served as the third president. 2. Arthur Henry Middleton, born June 26, 1742 AD, Middleton Place, near Charleston, South Carolina, and died January 1, 1787 AD. He was a planter, legislator, signer of the Declaration of Independence, and one of the leaders in the controversies that preceded the outbreak of the American Revolution, 1775 AD to 1783 AD. After completing his education in England, he returned to South Carolina in 1763 AD, and was elected to the colony's legislature, the House of Assembly. In 1775 AD, he was a member of the Council of Safety, a committee that provided leadership for the colony's preparations for revolution. He served on the legislative committee that drafted the South Carolina State Constitution and was a delegate to the Continental Congress, 1176 AD to 1778 AD. At the Siege of Charleston, 1780 AD, he served in the militia, was taken prisoner when the city fell to the British, and was sent to St. Augustine, Florida as a prisoner of war. After being exchanged in July 1781 AD, he was a member of the Continental Congress, 1781 AD, the South Carolina Legislature, 1785 AD, and on the original Board of Trustees of the College of Charleston. 3. Hancock John, 1737 AD, American patriot and statesman, who was the first to sign the Declaration of Independence. John Hancock was born on January 23, 1737 AD, in Braintree, now part of Quincy, Massachusetts, and was educated at Harvard College, now Harvard University. After his graduation, 1754 AD, he joined the mercantile firm of his uncle and guardian, the colonial businessman Thomas Hancock. In 1764 AD, he inherited the business and a substantial fortune. He was elected to the Massachusetts legislature 2 years later. He also served as the 13th president. From 1775 AD to 1780 AD, Hancock was a member of the Continental Congress, serving as a presiding officer during the first 2 years. By virtue of this office, he was the first to sign the Declaration of Independence. He was the first governor of the state of Massachusetts, holding that office from 1780 AD to 1785 AD, and from 1789 AD, until his death. Although he was initially opposed to the federal constitution, he later supported it and served as president of the Massachusetts Convention that approved the document in 1788 AD. He died in Quincy on October 8, 1793 AD. 4. Lawrence Henry, born 1724 AD, died 1792 AD, American colonial statesman, born in Charleston, South Carolina, where he was educated. He was a successful merchant of Charleston until 1764 AD, when he became a planter. He served almost continuously in the Colonial Assembly from 1757 AD to 1774 AD. In 1775 AD, he was president of the First Provincial Congress and was vice president of South Carolina from 1776 AD to 1777 AD. In 1777 AD, he became a member of the Continental Congress, serving as president in 1777 and 1778. In 1779 Congress appointed him envoy to negotiate a treaty with the Dutch, but he was captured at sea by the British and imprisoned in the Tower of London. In December 1781 AD, he was exchanged for the British General Charles Cornwallis, who had surrendered to the Americans. Late in 1782 AD, Lawrence was a signer of the preliminary peace treaty ending the American Revolution. He later returned to South Carolina. 5. John, born 1745 died 1829. American statesman and jurist, the first Chief Justice of the United States. John Jay was born in New York City and educated at King's College, now Columbia University. He was admitted to the bar in 1768 AD. He represented the point of view of the American merchants in protesting British restrictions on the commercial activities of the colonies, and he was elected to the Continental Congress in 1774 AD, and again in 1775 AD. He drafted the first Constitution of New York State and was appointed Chief Justice of the state in 1777 AD. In the following year he was again elected to the Continental Congress and was chosen its president. In Paris in 1782 AD, he was one of the commissioners who negotiated the Treaty of Paris with Great Britain, ending the American Revolution. From 1784 AD to 1789 AD, Jay was Secretary for Foreign Affairs. The ineffectiveness of the Articles of Confederation led him to become a proponent of a strong national government. With Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, Jay wrote the series of articles known as the Federalist, which urged ratification of the U.S. Constitution. In 1789 AD, President George Washington appointed Jay Chief Justice. In 1794 AD, when war with Britain threatened due to controversies over the Treaty of Paris, Jay was appointed by Washington to negotiate a settlement. He went to Great Britain and concluded the agreement known as Jay's Treaty. On his return to the U.S., Jay discovered that during his absence he had been elected governor of New York State. He resigned from the court and served as governor from 1795 AD to 1801 AD. He spent the rest of his life in retirement. 6. Samuel Huntington, born July 3, 1731 AD, Connecticut, and died January 5, 1796 AD. Norwich, signer of the Declaration of Independence, President of the Continental Congress, 1779 AD to 1781 AD, and Governor of Connecticut. He served in the Connecticut Assembly in 1765 AD, and was appointed as a judge of the Superior Court in 1774 AD. He was a member of the Governor's Council, 1775 AD to 1783 AD, concurrently with his service in the Continental Congress. Huntington returned in 1783 AD to Connecticut, where he became Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court in 1784 AD, Lieutenant Governor in 1785 AD, and Governor in 1786 AD. He was re-elected governor each year thereafter until his death. 7. Thomas McKean, 1734 AD to 1817 AD, was a Delaware signer of the Declaration of Independence. He served as a delegate to the Continental Congress and the Congress of the Confederation from 1774 AD to 1783 AD, and was governor of Pennsylvania from 1799 AD to 1808 AD. During his career as governor, he restrained radical politicians whose plans reduced the state to a condition of anarchy. McKean was born in New London, Pennsylvania. He studied law, and wrote most of the Delaware state constitution. 8. John Hanson, was born April 3, 1721, and died November 15, 1783 AD, was a Maryland patriot during the American Revolution and first president of the new nation under the Articles of Confederation. From this point on the following are presidents of the United States. As a member of the Maryland Assembly from 1757 AD, he became active in the resistance to British tax measures in the 1760s AD, and was an early supporter of independence. As a delegate to the Continental Congress, 1780-82 AD, he signed the Articles of Confederation and played an important part in persuading New York and Virginia to give up their claims to Western territory. Because he was elected by Congress as President of the United States in Congress assembled in 1781 AD, Hanson has sometimes been called the first President of the United States. Unknowingly to most, John Hanson was a Nubian, Nuwapian. 9. Boudinot Elias, was of Native American descent, born in Philadelphia, May 2, 1740, and died October 24, 1821, was a prominent patriot during the American Revolution. Although he initially believed that firm dependence in the mother country was essential, he was converted to the cause of independence and served twice, 1777 AD to 1778 AD, and 1781 AD to 1784 AD, in the Continental Congress. In 1782 AD to 1783 AD, he was president of that body. Boudinot helped bring about ratification by New Jersey of the U.S. Constitution and subsequently was a member of Congress, 1789 AD to 1795 AD, and Director of the U.S. Mint, 1795 AD to 1805 AD. He was a founder and the first president, 1816 AD to 1821 AD, of the American Bible Society. 10. Mifflin, Thomas, 1744 AD to 1800 AD, American soldier and statesman, born in Philadelphia, and educated at the College of Philadelphia, now the University of Pennsylvania. In the agitation over British policy preceding the American Revolution, he championed colonial rights and was elected a member of the First Continental Congress. After the outbreak of hostilities, he was appointed aide-de-camp to General George Washington and later Quartermaster General of the Revolutionary Army, a post he resigned after charges of mismanagement were brought against him. In 1777 AD, he was accused of being a ringleader of the Conway Cabal, a group that aimed at substituting General Horatio Gates for Washington as commander-in-chief, an intrigue that failed. Mifflin severed his connection with the army in 1779 AD. Later he was a delegate to Congress, 1782 AD to 1784 AD, president of that body, 1783 AD to 1984 AD, a member of the Federal Constitutional Convention, 1787 AD, and the first state governor of Pennsylvania, 1790 AD to 1799 AD. 11. Lee, Richard Henry, 1732 AD to 1794 AD, leader of the American Revolution, brother of Arthur and Francis Lee, born January 20, 1732 AD, in Stratford, Virginia. He entered the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1758 AD, and in his freshman speech proposed a resolution restricting the importation of slaves. He remained a member of the Virginia House until 1775 AD, with Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry. He was prominent in defending the rights of the colonies against Great Britain. Lee was among those who proposed the Committees of Correspondence that organized American resistance to British political and economic pressures, and, in 1773 AD, he became a member of the Virginia Committee of Correspondence. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress from 1774 AD to 1779 AD, and, on June 7, 1776 AD, he offered a resolution that ultimately gave rise to the Declaration of Independence, which he later signed. In the debates on the United States Constitution, he opposed the views of the Federalist Party because he felt that the Constitution, as proposed, infringed on states' rights. In defense of his principles, Lee proposed, in substantially the words in which it was finally adopted, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution: the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. He died at his plantation near Stratford, on June 19, 1794 AD. 12. Nathaniel Gorham, 1738 AD to 1796 AD, was a signer of the United States Constitution. He served in the Massachusetts legislature from 1771 AD to 1775 AD. He also served several terms in the Continental Congress, and was acting president in 1786 AD and 1787 AD. In the Constitutional Convention, Gorham became president of the Committee of the Whole for several weeks and urged a strong central government. He was born in Charlestown, Massachusetts. The last two presidents were John St. Clair and Henry Griffin. Out of these 14 presidents of the Continental Congress, Elias Boudinot and John Hanson were the two Nubian presidents.